This one is fascinating. Okay. This is a story I have covered in the past, but it's been a long time. Maybe you haven't seen my old video. But basically, there is this controversy brewing in a small city outside Toledo, Ohio, and it involves a fake, makeshift Christian homeless shelter. Okay, I'm going to try to make sense of what the hell happened a year ago, and then I'll tell you what's happening today. Basically, last year in the Midwest, it was super cold, as it always is. It's freezing. And there was a pastor who decided to house homeless people inside his church because they had nowhere else to go. And that sounds really great. I mean, remember when Joel Osteen turned away people because he didn't want them in his church after a hurricane? Like, this pastor in Ohio said, why don't you just come inside my building? And when that happened, he was charged with 18 zoning violations by the city. And he pleaded not guilty to all of those charges. And the fact that the city went after that guy seemed extremely cruel. Like, here's a guy trying to help the less fortunate. Isn't that what we want Christians to be doing? Isn't that Jesus-like? How is he the bad guy here, right? There was actually an article. This is the headline in the Christian Post. Ohio pastor arraigned after being charged for housing homeless at church. Like, yeah, that sounds bad. This is an article in the Columbus Dispatch, an opinion piece. Ohio City targets pastor who helped homeless stay warm in freezing weather. What's the crime? Like, yeah, it looks pretty bad that the city went after this dude. And when I talked about this a while ago, I also brought up that those were legit points. Homelessness really is a big problem in our country. Cities as small as this one in Bryan, Ohio, and as large as San Francisco, we've all heard about how they are struggling to deal with homelessness. But whenever some right-wing group takes up a cause like this, and the pastor is doing like a full-on media blitz on conservative propaganda outlets, it's worth taking a closer look at why the city actually went after this guy. And that starts by talking about his church, because Dad's Place, which is what he calls his church, it's not really a church. It's actually a video arcade called Crane and Abel's Mini Claw Mania. It actually has a lot of those claw machines where you like hover over a toy and then release it and hope it picks up a toy. Like, clever name, Crane and Abel. I like it. But he has this building in the business district, and he has like a back room, and he just calls that his church. So he was actually just letting these people into his business, not some residential facility. I should say in 2020, he did request permission to set up a church inside his building, and the city gave it to him, but they assumed he was going to abide by the zoning laws. And one of the things I saw in a lot of news stories at the time is that the city went after this guy for technical reasons. His church was in a business district. You're in a business district, you can't have any residential facilities on the first floor. No one's supposed to live on the first floor. And he was doing that. People were not supposed to be eating there. They're not supposed to wash their clothes there. They're not supposed to be sleeping on the first floor. And he broke those rules. And when the city's fire chief inspected his church last November 2023, he found 18 separate violations. That's what led to all these charges. Now, maybe you're thinking, who cares? These people needed a place to stay. It's cold outside. I should tell you, there is a homeless shelter next to this church, and they just didn't have the ability to take in everyone they needed to take in. And all of those might be legitimate arguments. They are absolutely compassionate ones. But I think what a lot of people missed a year ago is that the city was not going after this guy because he was helping the homeless. They went after him because he was literally putting the lives of those homeless people in danger. And I want to be clear on this. A church cannot just randomly open up a soup kitchen on a whim. There are local regulations that need to be followed so that everyone is on the up and up. You want to make sure the food that is being served is safe for everyone to eat, right? That's why you don't just say like, hey, homeless people, come over here and we're going to give you food because there's no way to control the quality there. As long as the rules are obeyed, hey, guess what? I wish more churches would do that sort of thing. It sounds really great. So let me show you what the fire chief said last November when he inspected this place, because I have his write-up here. Several of these violations were serious and potentially endanger the lives and safety of those in the building. Some of the serious violations include improper installation of laundry facilities, inadequate or unsafe exit areas, LP cylinder for gas grill improperly placed in the building, an unpermitted gas dryer installed with impermissible plastic duct outside our guidelines, no permitted and approved kitchen food over the hood, over the stove, limited ventilation. Basically, this place is a health hazard. So when you bring people in to live there, even temporarily, oh my God, there are so many things that could go wrong. And imagine for a second, let's say a fire breaks out in that building and all these people die. Who do you think the public is going to be mad at? The guy who took in these people or the city for allowing this to happen, even though this place was not living up to the city's regulations? That was the concern. If you can't see the exit signs in a building, that's bad. If the carbon monoxide and smoke detectors are not being tested regularly, that could be bad. You know what I mean? If there was an actual emergency, the city was going to be on the hook. So they said, you cannot have these people in the building. Now, the police chief said, we gave this dude a reasonable amount of time to fix these problems, which made sense because they weren't trying to attack him for doing something nice, but he didn't do it. He never fixed those problems. And so they had to keep going after him. Now, the other thing I should tell you is that the city also found out that of the people this guy was taking into his makeshift church, there were allegations of inappropriate activity, that he had taken in people who were committing criminal mischief, trespassing, overdose, larceny, harassment, disturbing the peace, and sexual assault. And let me show you what the city actually said about the sexual assault here, because, oh my God, it's scary. The city actually said, look at this redacted police department report. I then spoke with Chris. This is the reverend of this church. I'll move myself here. He did confirm he is aware that this dude is a sex offender and this dude does have permission to be at his church. Chris was trying to work with him and find him a place to live. I made Chris aware that this dude cannot be living out of his vehicle in a city parking lot. So there was a mix of the city letting this guy know, hey, you can't bring these people into your building. It's scary. It's bad for not just business, but it's bad for the people in the building. And he did it anyway. Let me also show you a picture of this facility. Here is Mini Clawmania. There's the location. And right next to it is an actual homeless shelter that obeys all the rules and regulations, right? Like maybe the city can help that place on the right take in more people because the place on the left is not zoned to do that sort of thing. Okay. Ultimately, all of this is to say the city was interested in protecting people. There were legitimate criticisms we can always make about whether city officials are doing enough to house the homeless. I'm all for those discussions. But again, a city doesn't always have the money to like build affordable housing or anything like that. And here's this reverend. His name is Chris Avell. Here's this guy trying to help these people, and the city's like, we appreciate you doing that, but also you're putting everyone's lives at risk. So that was disturbing. The one upside to him doing this, to taking these people in, is that maybe he could pressure the city to take homelessness more seriously, create more affordable housing, expand the shelters that were out there. But at the same time, I found it really hard to sympathize with the Reverend because the guidelines the city was asking him to obey seemed reasonable to me, right? I know his cause makes for good headlines, but if tragedy strikes because of his negligence, it would be bad for everybody. Okay, so at the time, a right-wing organization called First Liberty, an attorney for them represented this reverend, and he said this is all Christian persecution. Like, they really wanted to fundraise off of this dude. The lawyer did an interview with HuffPost, and look at what Jeremy Dice, this attorney, told HuffPost, because they asked him, like, aren't these regulations sensible? And Dice on Friday said the city's statement is filled with half-truths and malicious innuendo designed to vilify the most desperate and downtrodden in their community. When asked about the fire code violations, he dismissed them as a form of lawfare harassment against the church. Each time police visited, Dice said, they presented new nitpicky issues that he believes were designed by law enforcement to be impossible to keep up with. Like, my dude, they were saying, make sure the smoke alarms work. Make sure the exit sign is visible at night. Make sure there are no fire hazards in the building when you are taking in all these people. This is not Christian persecution. All right? They were not trying to go after the dude for being Christian. Okay. I made a video about all this a year ago. I will link to it if you want to get into even more depth. But basically, here's what has happened since then. First Liberty, that conservative group, they sued the city of Bryan on behalf of his video arcade church. And then in February, the two sides got together and agreed to a compromise. The city said, we will drop all the charges against you, but you got to end the residential operations and you got to get the proper certification and necessary permits. Like, as long as you do that, we're not going to go after you in court. But that did not work because the Reverend Chris Avell, he did not uphold his end of the deal. He kept housing people despite the dangerous conditions. So the city had to do something about it, and they ended up doing just that. They issued a press release. This is from April, I believe, where they basically said, listen, we had another inspection in April, and this guy still isn't following the rules. This press release is like 5 pages long, but I want you to look at a couple things in particular. The citations that they gave this guy follow a thorough inspection on April 24th, 2024 by the fire chief. Let me scroll down here, which found 15 individuals sleeping in the main room of the church. The building owner and the pastor who's renting the building face city and state fire code citations for using a building approved for Group A occupancy, which allows for gatherings and worship, as a residential place where people are living. He was allowed to do this, but he was doing this instead. Additionally, the sleeping area that has been documented does not have automatic sprinklers. Each of these violations, if not corrected, has a penalty of $1,000 a day. And look at what this city's mayor says at the bottom here. We did not want to do this. We must do this for the safety of the people using the church, renters in space above the church, and the businesses adjacent to the building. All of that makes sense. This place is a fire hazard, and there are people living here who could create a fire. And if that happens, there are people who could die. It is the city's responsibility to protect those people and make sure everyone's obeying the rules. All of that makes sense to me. The mayor, Carrie Schlade, she went on to say that this dispute had led to her own children being harassed and threatened on social media. And she said the Reverend and his attorneys have managed to turn issues of safety and complying with laws designed to keep people safe into a publicity-seeking crusade about religious freedom. So what did First Liberty do? After all that, they filed for a temporary restraining order so the city cannot shut down this fire hazard. And you know what a judge said to all that? No, we're not letting the city avoid its responsibilities. You're the one who's doing everything wrong here. So a judge sided with the city, and rightly so. In fact, this is actually coming from this month, December, earlier this month. Look at what this judge wrote in his decision. Let me pull this up here. Here we go. Dad's Place and Christopher Avell have numerous options available to address the fire chief's concerns, Judge Stelzer wrote. While it is obvious that the city would be blamed if a fire causing injury or death were to break out inside Dad's Place, and the city had made no attempt to enforce its own regulations and fire codes. Yeah, like you need to do what they're asking you to do. They're not coming after you because you're Christian. First Liberty has now appealed that decision, and the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals has said we are blocking that earlier ruling because we need time to look at this case. And that is scary. Like an appellate court is saying, all right, we heard what that earlier judge said. We're going to block his ruling. The city cannot come after you until we have ruled on this issue. And I don't like how that sounds. Let me show you how First Liberty is responding to this. They have asked the appellate court to obviously reverse that earlier ruling, but look at how they're making that argument. This is in their brief with the Sixth Circuit. Let me see if I can get this here. Come on, internet. You can do it. Here we go. It is not for the city or the court to dictate how a church must understand or carry out its own mission. The church believes its mission is to provide a place of refuge and rest 24 hours a day, which includes the physical rest of sleep. The city has ordered the church to stop providing that rest. The city's actions therefore plainly burden the church's religious exercise. Unfreaking believable. Their argument to the judges is, excuse me, Jesus told us we have to help people who are suffering. And the city is saying, yeah, but you got to have smoke alarms and you got to have sprinklers in your building in case of fire. And that's a burden on our practice of religion. Unbelievable that they are spinning the city's complaints into a tale of persecution. And not only that, they had a fundraising letter that First Liberty posted on their website. Look at what this said. The city's harassment and hostility towards this church is wrong and illegal. It must stop. It is appalling when the mayor of a city and local officials abuse their position to vindictively go after good Samaritans like Pastor Chris. This cannot be allowed to happen in America. Oh my God, all the city was asking is don't murder the people who are coming to you as a sanctuary. Make sure they are safe. And the way they can be safe is to make sure your building is up to code. And they are just acting like this mayor is going after them for being Christian. It's such a bullshit argument. And the way all of this culminated this past week is that another attorney for First Liberty, he wrote a guest article for the Columbus Dispatch, and he's basically trashing the city for thinking about everyone's safety. Look at this guest column. This is from who? This dude. His name is Ryan Gardner. He's a attorney for First Liberty. Look at what he writes. Sadly, it appears nothing will deter the city from its conquest to criminalize compassion. Indeed, it is unclear if even visits from the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future would cause the city to change course. One can only hope that a higher court will intervene in this case, protect Dad's Place and its congregants, and provide a Christmas miracle to a church in desperate need of one. Look at how he's trying to make an emotional sounding plea because the city said, hey, you're going to start a fire in this building because of the shit you're doing and everyone's going to get killed. And they're like, why are they criminalizing compassion? It's not compassion to murder people coming to you for help. I do not know why I need to explain that to Christians who do this for a living. There is no mention in that essay about the safety violations, no mention of the sex offender, no mention of how the city is trying to protect these people. What they do instead is that they say, remember COVID? Well, the city said we couldn't meet as churches during COVID because the city was like, you're going to spread a deadly airborne virus. But we had church. And the city said we're not allowed to gather in large numbers. And it was persecution then, and we're not letting them do it to us again. Like, yeah, they didn't allow anybody to meet for for gatherings in 2020. That wasn't religious persecution. That was, there's an airborne virus and we don't want people to die. Again, these people just spin everything to be like, look at how horrible it is to be a white Christian in society. It's like, dude, they're not coming after you for that. They're trying to help everybody. Now, this week, the mayor has weighed in, as wrote a rebuttal to that horrible opinion piece in the Columbus Dispatch. And I want to share with you some of what this mayor is saying, because it's like, finally, a voice of reason in this entire mess. As we continue through the justice system, our entire community continues to suffer at the hands of folks like Ryan Gardner. Holy shit, she is taking it to this dude. I love it. The issue has always been and will remain one of public safety, as religious freedom has never been violated. After all, the church has not been closed by the city for a single minute over the last 14 months. Saying, yeah, you have been violating our rules for 14 months and we haven't shut you down. We have tried to work with you. All of you are completely unreasonable and you're refusing to do the bare minimum, so you're leaving me with no choice here. And if that's what you're doing, what do you expect from me at this point? And I so appreciate that the mayor is just dispensing with any bullshit and just saying. She also said in the same article, if the business chooses not to comply, a fire inspector can and will bar the doors. We chose not to do this specifically because we did not want to violate the church's right to religious freedom. She says they tried to compromise, but they chose not to, essentially admitting they were not in compliance and had no intention of coming into compliance. She also said it's not a surprise that 3 separate courts have issued decisions rejecting the church's claims against the city. Basically, the city's doing everything it can to accommodate this dude's batshit insane religious beliefs, but he's violating so many safety precautions that the city has an obligation to enforce its own rules. Even if this guy doesn't care about the safety of the people he's housing, doesn't mean the city officials get the luxury of ignoring that too. This reverend thinks he's protecting people. The city officials are the one who actually give a damn about those people. And just because it doesn't have the resources it needs to give those people a home doesn't mean they are abandoning their responsibilities just because this reverend is putting them in a dangerous situation. The city has an obligation to take rules seriously, even if religious zealots ignore them in order to advance their own cause. Like, this reverend and his lawyers, they want to fight religious battles and they want to drain city resources, and they do not want to create a shelter that would actually protect people in case of emergencies. So I sincerely hope the Sixth Circuit rules on this quickly and that they uphold the earlier decision from a judge saying that the city is fine and the church is wrong to ignore the rules. Because if they don't, and if this ruling is overturned, more churches may cut corners under the guise of compassion, and they won't realize how idiotic that is until they are faced with an actual disaster that kills the very people they say they are helping. I don't want that to happen, and it's disturbing to me that these pastors just absolutely do not care about any of it. All right, I'm going to pause with that story, take some questions here, and let's see if I can close these tabs here. All right, what questions do we have? The food doesn't have to be safe in New York City. Oh, that makes me feel good. They feed us rotten turkey one Thanksgiving, and we were told because the turkeys were donated, we had no civil avenue to pursue. 100 were hospitalized. Well, that's disturbing for all kinds of reasons. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. But again, that's an argument for more regulation from city officials, even when it comes to something like feeding people who need food. We cannot let them get sick and die. We should find a way to make sure they are being served healthy meals, safe meals, things like that. Let me see if I can pull. There's like something on my screen that is literally blocking the thing I want to. There we go. Brooklyn Jews swing chickens around their head during Yom Kippur. The result is filth on the sidewalks. That is true. I think you're talking about Orthodox Jews specifically, and they have a ritual that involves swinging chickens around their head. And that story has come up before. Whoa, what just happened there? Come back, me. There we go. I have talked about that story before for other reasons, but you're right. Like when people allow religious people to do dangerous things or harmful things in the name of, well, we got to let them do it because it's their faith, bad things happen. And I think as long as the city has a secular general reason that applies to everybody for doing the things they do, religious people have an obligation to follow those rules. And of course, the big legal story in the past several years has been religious zealots saying the rules that apply to everyone else should not apply to me because I'm Christian. With some of those violations, I'm surprised he was able to have the claw business in that building. No kidding, man. I don't know why he's allowed to just take a business and turn it into a church and then turn it into a homeless shelter because those things all have different requirements. And I don't know why the city said yes to all those things, other than they thought it was not a big deal. And now he's made it a big deal. And now the city's in the position of having to fix it after the fact, when the correct answer should have been, you shouldn't have allowed this to happen in the first place. This is litigious shielding, not a concern for people. I'm not sure what you are meaning by that, so I'm going to ignore that question. Housing the homeless versus imposing code protections overlooks disposition of the homeless. If the refuge cannot meet code, there should be no refuge. Code does not address homelessness. I think what you are saying is, who cares how dangerous it is inside the building? Because obviously, if you're outside in the cold, it's even worse. And so, why are we ignoring the fact that these people have somewhere to go inside? I hope I am explaining what you are saying correctly. And again, I think to a point, you are right. The city has an obligation to make sure there are enough shelters and housing so that they can deal with the homeless population that they have. If there is a way for them to address that using the resources they have, they need to do that first and foremost. At the same time, if these people are going inside a city building, a place that has the permits licensed by the city, and there is, say, an electrical problem in that building, the city is now going to be held liable for not upholding its own regulations. So that's why the city has a responsibility to shut this stuff down. If businesses, whatever type of residential facilities are happening, if they're not shutting these places down, they could and should be sued if something happens. Now, that is a separate concern from the point you are making here, because I agree. That's why I was sympathetic to this guy at first, the Reverend, because it's like, well, where else are these people going to go? It's cold outside. The shelter next door could not take them in. I think they had capped out how many people they could take. So why are we mad at a guy next door for taking them in? But at the same time, if the guy's keeping them in his like medieval torture chamber, because that's what all this bad wiring and lack of safety concerns is, then the city has an obligation to make sure nothing worse happens. And yes, they also have an obligation to make sure these people are getting help. And if they can't deal with it, they should figure out another place for these homeless people to go, because the Reverend here is putting them in danger of a different kind. So I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying, legally speaking, the city has an obligation to take care of this in a certain way. The pastor could have given a place to sleep and not created all the dangerous hazards. He could have. Listen, if he opened up like a GoFundMe and said, I'm trying to help these people, can we get them a hotel room for a few weeks or something during the winter? I feel like he could have raised that money and people like me would have chipped in for that. Instead, he's like, come inside my crane machine business and sleep here. I'm calling it a church now. It's like, that's not how shelters work. And more people are in danger. And also, you're housing a sex offender, and that could be bad for other people in the building. And also, if a fire starts because of all these people here, because they're sleeping here, the people who actually live upstairs are in danger too. I believe the church was also providing access where the shelter next door had strict rules of when one could come and go. That might be very accurate. And again, that doesn't negate anything I'm saying, but yeah, for whatever reason, the place next door couldn't take everyone in.